Hello, I am Alan Stoga, chairman of the Tällberg Foundation, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's celebration of the winners of the 2021 Tällberg-SNF-Eliasson Global Leadership Prize. Before we meet the four winners, some brief housekeeping. First, you can find today's agenda in the chat. Second, as you will see, in addition to the winners, the jury who selected those winners will be with us throughout the program today. These women and men are all accomplished leaders in their own right from literally around the world. I want to thank them for their wisdom, their patience, their senses of humor, their persistence, and the goodwill that they brought to the jury room. As I think you'll hear them say over the course of the next hour and a half or so, it was an amazing experience that we shared, and I think it's fair to say renewed all of our belief that better times are on the way. Third, we hope that you'll ask questions using Zoom's Q&A function. If you don't get an answer today, we'll send you one or we will post it on tällbergfoundation.org. In addition, from time to time over the course of the program, we're going to be asking poll questions of the audience, brief questions, brief answers, and we'll show you the answers a few minutes after they've been posted. The selection process for the Tällberg-SNF-Eliasson Global Leadership Prize started early in 2021. Over the course of several months, we received more than 2,400 nominations from 126 countries and countless different disciplines. The process of taking that enormous set of nominations and boiling it down to ultimately four winners had a number of steps. We used artificial intelligence. We had a 20-person pre-jury, put human eyes and minds onto the problem. We vetted through extensive research around the world. And finally, the jury of a dozen women and men spent a couple of long weekends worrying through, talking through, discussing, and ultimately voting on these winners. Many of you who are with us today or will be over the course of this hour and a half made nominations. Thank you very much for that. All of that effort had one purpose. We believe at the Tällberg Foundation that we are at a moment in time where global, value-based, dynamic, innovative leadership ought to be at a premium, but is too rare. We believe it's out there, and we're committed to trying to find it and trying to nurture it. I'm delighted to introduce the four winners. I think you will agree that the results of this year's selection are outstanding. Now, please meet the winners.
I think to realize my vision, the first thing I had to learn was that I was not going to do it myself. Saving the oceans is not a one-person endeavor. But to be able to create space for others means learning to take a back seat. I see myself as an opportunity creator, so create opportunities for people that I think have far more skills and ability than I have, and then opening these doors and holding them open so people can surpass me and go on to do the incredible things that they have the capacity to do. I think that's the only way we're going to save the ocean, which is 70% of our planet.
The pathway that we in Snow Change and myself believe in really builds on this idea of thinking about and undoing the damages of the past century to survive the present century. So all of the work that I do, whether it's rewilding or maintaining traditional knowledge and supporting environmental conservation and things like that, is aimed towards one single purpose. How do we keep these lands intact and also the humans and non-humans that are here?
My vision for my initiative is that one day we don't need learn. One day there is an Afghanistan that doesn't need to have that crisis on every news outlet. Doesn't have to be people are starving in my country. Is the fact that there is no need for organizations.
There are so many challenges regard palliative care. Yeah, not only in Rwanda, but in most African countries, there is so many similarities. So one of the challenges is access to opioids, to morphine. And the second challenge is education. As a medical physician who was really suffering to see patients suffer, I think that was the motivation.
I've surpassed my own limitations and my beliefs that I was just a scientist to do something that I think is much greater, and it has, for me, just being recognized globally as a leader it's huge, and it's truly a very emotional moment for me, not just as a scientist, but as a person who can open the world up and allow other people to come in and to change this planet together.
I was raised up in the ice, and it's really that understanding, another understanding of our lakes, forests and ecosystems rooted in a kind of a core of a culture that provides the, shall we say, endless energy to fight for these lands and these forests and lakes. I do really believe that the instinct and the wisdom and the heart are the solutions.
When Learn started, we started with 5 digital schools and 900 students. And in the past 3-4 years, we have grown so much that we have 7,000 girls. We had 18 digital schools, and we had 5 rural schools. And we had all that. And then in August, it all went away. So yeah, of course, it's heartbreaking, but sometimes I just tell myself, like, that was a good time, this is a bad time, someday we'll again have a good time.
Every time when I'm going to see a patient, it's not about what I have, it's about who I am. It's about my presence in front of the patient that makes a difference. It's not about how many patients I treat, it's about how many patients I can be able to be there. If you want to understand how is the society, what is the trend in the society, just follow a patient who's in end-of-life care. Then you can understand the happiness, the hope, fear, trust, disgust from the patient, and you can be able to understand the society. So the way a patient dies can reflect how the society lives.
This, of course, is where, if we were together, we would be standing and clapping wildly. But we're not together, so that's the best we could do. In a few moments, you're going to meet each of those 4 great leaders, but I want to start this conversation today with Andreas Terkopoulos, co-president of the Stavros Niarchos Foundation. Andreas, this year we had 2 innovations in the leadership. One is the name, the Tällberg-SNF-Eliasson Global Leadership Prize. And the second was we launched an Emerging Leaders category. Your fingerprints were all over both of those. So it's a simple question to start. Why do you think leadership, especially global leadership, is important at this particular moment in time? And secondly, why do you think we need to worry and nurture, not worry, nurture younger leaders?
Thank you. First of all, it's great to be here. To be here today, and many congratulations to the four leaders for the award. I think, to your point, I don't know why, but I was listening to this song. I mean, we are, us older people, are listening to this song by Billy Joel called "Honesty," and he talks about
you are getting old.
How honesty is such a lonely word. And I don't know why, I make the connection, and every day we talk about all these issues, and there's a common denominator. Leadership has become such a lonely word, and we are all in need of leadership at all levels of life, not only politically, business-wise, in our private lives. Leadership is something which we used to take for granted, and I think now we have realized that there's a real lack of leaders around the world. And as with everything else, you really have to nurture it from a young age. And for me, it's a way of life. And it's some of the issues that we're having all around us, that we have lost a few of the basic human values in terms of decency, trust, hard work, responsibility, appreciation, all of these things which are traits of a good leader. And I love the last statement that the way you die basically reflects on the way you live. And you have to give it all you have, and you have to do it in a decent way. And we need leaders around the world at all levels, and we need to nurture them, and we need to share with them, as older people, share with them our experiences, and try to help them provide the infrastructure and the opportunities for them to share the leadership skills in our society.
We both know lots of people who are called leaders in the corporate sector, in politics, in academia, in philanthropy. I'd argue most of them are not leaders. That's a different point. Without naming names, I'm not looking for names. I'm looking for why, in your experience, are some women and men particularly successful as leaders? In an era where, as you described, there's all sorts of things, there's all sorts of headwinds to be a successful leader today.
I think that's part of, without sounding more depressed than what we should.
They're going to make us happier later on.
Yes,
these are wonderful leaders.
And they already do with what we saw from the video. But it used to be that you took a good leader, you took them for granted. In other words, if he or she had risen to the spot of being a leader, you assume they had all the traits. And then you had a few bad apples, a few bad leaders. Nowadays, I think there is a lack of trust. Maybe in also the process. Maybe the process is wrong on how people rise to the spot of being a leader. And that's why we have the issue. And that's why when you see a good leader, you say, wow, a good leader. So it's the exception nowadays to have a good leader. And I think most people have to look themselves in the mirror, number one, but also we all have to look at the process. What processes do we use in every industry, from politics, from business, from everywhere, in order for a person to rise to the spot of being a leader, which, by the way, which is again part of the problem, you're not a leader to benefit yourself. A leader for me is being a public servant. You have to lead by example, and you have to lead to put in the hard work to help others also get better at what they do. You have to inspire people. So it's a way of life which I think may be different. We may have lost part of the meaning of the word leader, and that's part of the problem, together with the process on how people become the leaders around the world. But again, it gives us great hope.
Before we started, I was thinking this morning that leaders are to some extent defined by their followers. That is to say, a leader without a follower is not a leader, first, but second, a great leader can take whomever she or he's responsible for, a nation, a company, a nonprofit, to where they can have the potential to get. That is to say, it's not just show up every day and you do the next. It's rather take them from somewhere they are to somewhere they could be.
I think it's like the chicken and the egg about the followers and the leaders. One gets what he or she deserves on both sides, but I'm a bit stricter. If you become a leader, it's your responsibility to do it right and to inspire and to, so I wouldn't blame the followers, although it is part of life, because we vote for what we get. That doesn't happen in every industry. Sometimes people are appointed. So again, I would say that it's more about the person who does become a leader to accept the responsibility of the position, not only to inspire, but also to live after it.
In the last few seconds we have for this conversation, I want to ask about the word global. You and I both know that most of what's going on these days needs global solutions, but we also know that most of the solutions are about this big that are proposed. Most people are afraid of trying to operate or even conceive at a global level. They'd rather look at their feet than at the skies. How do we change that?
I would go back to the same thing like Billy Joel's song, honesty is a lonely word. The old saying, think global, act local. And that has a big reflection everywhere in our own lives, You can think big, but you have to start somewhere. You have to start. I'm a big believer in the bottoms up. I'm a big believer you can think global, but you have to act local and then connect the dots and create that global environment instead of like taking the global for granted and assuming that this global approach is going to work everywhere.
I agree with all that. I would underline the word act, because sometimes way too much blah, 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 and way too little act. Let's end by me thanking you for the incredible support that you personally and the Establishment Archives Foundation has given the Tällberg Foundation. We can do the voodoo we do in part because of you.
No, but thank you also for all you do. And thanks for everybody participating, and many, many congratulations to the leaders. They give us hope.
Now let's switch gears. We've asked 4 jurors to discuss leadership with the 4 winners from 2021. I'm happy to introduce David Kiernan and Asha DeVos to start that part of the conversation. John knows.
Hello, Asha, can you hear me?
I can. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I don't see you on video yet, but first, congratulations on winning the Tällberg Global Leadership Prize.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited, and I got really shaky in the video when they asked me the question about how I felt. It's a real honor to be here, and I want to also say a big thank you to the jury, but also to my nominator. I only found out who it was like a couple of weeks ago, and I think it's kind of remarkable that you can continue on your own journey, and there are people who see you for what you're doing and will stick their necks out for you. So thank you. You know who you are.
Let me start by asking you, what does it mean to you to be a leader?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I think I'm going to follow on from the conversation that's just been had. And I would say from a personal angle, I think everyone can be a leader, right? I think we emphasize like, you're born a leader. And I think in some ways that's not entirely true. I think we can cultivate leadership. But I think there's a lot of key things that you have to think about when you're going into this space. And it can come naturally as well. So a few things, like, for example, I think you learn that your life is not just your own, and it can be used for something. It can be more useful than to everyone else as well, and not just to yourself. And I think that's a key point. You have to make, that you live by a certain set of values, right? And so you make decisions based on those values, and sometimes those decisions might not help you in the short term, but they will help others in the long term. They may open up doors for other people that might not get opportunities, and that is based on that one decision that you make. I think it's about being honest about your journey and letting people see you for who you are. So that relatability, I think, makes a massive difference, because it allows people to believe in themselves as well. And I think we are all human, and I think we mustn't disconnect from everybody and just assume that, oh, I'm a leader, therefore, I'm so special, because we're not. We're all made of the same flesh and blood and the same kind of drive and passion for life. And we have to make sure we kind of stir those fires in other people and let them believe in themselves as well. And I also think, it's about, basically, it's a long journey and learning to work really hard and building, over time you build this trust. And the word trust has just come up in this quiz, which is actually spot on, right? I think the reason these journeys are long is because along the way you're building trust, and trust doesn't happen overnight. And that trust is based on the kinds of decisions you're making, the way you interact with people, how you allow people into your life, how you listen. Listening is such a big task for a leader, a really key trait, I would say. And finally, I think it's about living your best life so others can live theirs.
Well, thank you. In looking through some of your interviews, you talk about vision. How does having a vision help you serve as a leader?
I think having a vision gives you something to anchor onto, right? It's like we talk about this, your true north, right? So you have something that you have in the distance, and that's where you're trying to get. And I think it's really helpful to have that. One key thing is I've noticed even in my own journey that my vision has kind of evolved over time, right? I started off many years ago, wanting to be a marine biologist, wanting to be, I was trying to fulfill a dream of becoming a marine biologist in a country where being a marine biologist was unheard of. It was a very personal dream. But over time, I realized that, like now I'm here, I can create space for other people. And that's how I kind of evolved my vision into what it is today, which is about, kind of creating space for others to enter the field so we can create a much bigger team to tackle the grand challenges of our oceans. So I think having that vision also helps to make decisions and in some of the toughest moments, because that's my vision, and making this decision doesn't serve that vision, and therefore I need to walk away. And I think that's been a really key part of having a vision.
And is part of that vision Ocean Swell, the nonprofit that you're a part of? Is that where the vision would lead to?
Yeah, certainly. So Ocean Swell is, I would say, a part of that vision. So for me, like I mentioned, when I started out, at 17, I was like fresh-faced and excited about becoming a marine biologist, right? So I was telling everybody, oh, I'm going to be a marine biologist. And Sri Lankans were like, oh, that's awesome. Like, what are you going to do with that degree? And I come from this beautiful tropical island, right? So I was clearly the one with the, long-term job prospects, so not really anyone else. But the point being that, everybody was telling me that I couldn't do it. And then as I've grown in the field, I realized that representation, the 70% of our coastlines are in the developing world or the global south, but the vast majority of people who work in this space aren't. The representation at the global stage is negligible, right? And so for me, my kind of drive now is try to build, increase diversity in marine sciences and marine conservation, make it a much more inclusive field and make it equitable. And if we truly want to save our oceans, every coastline needs a local hero. And that is, local heroes can come from anywhere. You don't have to have a degree in marine science to care for the oceans, to care for anything, in fact. And so my vision, Ocean Swell, allows me, I built this organization so I can start to kind of nurture that next generation of diverse ocean heroes here in Sri Lanka. And I've seen, the fruits of my labor. More people than ever before want to be marine scientists, right? Which is awesome. And that means, we can show to the world that, it is possible for you as well. And so this is a small part of a grand journey. And I think it's working.
One of the concepts that you introduced me to was a colonial behavior in science. And I guess, first of all, to have outstanding women in science was a big deal when I was growing up, now that I'm older. And you, on top of that, have introduced the notion of that there is a colonial behavior to some of the marine science in the world, even though it's a global scientific network. How do you deal with those issues?
Yeah, so just so that everybody's on the same page, basically colonial science or parachute science or conservation is really where you have scientists or researchers from the global north coming into countries in the global south, like Sri Lanka, doing work, but really not investing in the local capacity or infrastructure and just bouncing, right? Leaving to go process their data, do whatever they have to do, and that creates a dependency on the external teams. It cripples local conservation efforts. That work is often driven by outsiders' assumptions and motives, and you have this unhealthy power imbalance, right? And so that's a really unhealthy situation because, like I said, the ocean is vast, it's huge, there's room for everyone, and we need to be encouraging more people into space. And a handful of people from one small part of the globe can't tackle all the grand challenges that we face. So for me, it really is about how do we create that equity, right? Like that, how do we make a more equitable planet? How do we build guidelines and build collaborations and partnerships that are equal? So through Ocean Swell, I have projects where we have incredible scientists from, Canada, Australia, the US, but we come together as a single team. We realize that we need all people in that team to successfully get the work done. We recognize that capacity is not built just one way, where the outsider comes in and tells us, how to do things. They might have the technical capacity, but we have the local expertise. And without both those ingredients, we can't actually succeed, right, in resolving the problem. But it's also about then leaving things behind, right? So making sure that whoever's involved in the project can run the project, understands the project, and can do the science in the absence of the rest of us, so that the work can continue in the long term. And it's a conversation that's bubbling. I actually was just talking at a workshop just before I came in here, and I talked about this at a workshop yesterday. So it's bubbling in all spaces, and I'm really excited. I think we might be at a tipping point where we're truly understanding how we can do better, not just for ourselves, but also for the planet.
So true for the global issues we're dealing with. Let me ask you one last question. What changes would you like to see in the spaces where you're working?
Yeah, for me, you know what? I would just like to see where, marine science where, we have anyone and everyone feels like they are best prepared to make great decisions for our oceans, right? So really, you can be a banker, you can be a baker, you can be an accountant, you can be, a garment factory worker. It doesn't matter. Every one of us does something that has an impact on the oceans, and I want everyone to be able to access all the stories and the information, to be inspired and excited about the oceans, and to be, have a strong desire to protect it, knowing that they can be part of the solution and not just part of the problem. And I think that's a really big thing, and I think that's where we're going to make a difference if we truly are more open and inclusive and accepting of the fact that every coastline needs a local hero.
And how do you describe local heroes? Give me a sense of what a local hero would be.
To me, a local hero is someone who, kind of lives in a certain space, can speak the local language, can have a cup of tea with the local community, can see problems as they arise, can address them with local solutions, not a blanket global solution, but really understand, like, here in this area, this is what will work. Can, motivate the people around them to come together to address what's going on the ground. I think those people can come from anywhere, and they can be anyone. And I think that's what we have to remember.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much. And again, congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Hi, Tero. Do you see me? Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, Martha, how are you doing?
I'm good, Terve. How are you? Mitä kuuluu?
Hyvä kuuluu. It's all okay. It's actually minus 25 here, so it's a little bit colder than in Asha's place, I'm sure.
For sure, and definitely colder than here. First of all, congratulations on winning this prestigious prize. This is really, really great. I'd love to start this conversation by asking you about something that is very much at the core of who you are and what you do, Tero, is, I think you describe yourself first and foremost as a fisherman, besides the fact that you're, also a professor, you're a researcher, you also are the president and co-founder of Snow Change, and also the head of your village of Selki. So I would love to hear a little bit more about, what role does fishing play, especially in terms of understanding the ecosystem. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, first of all, I would just like to also join Asha and everybody else in thanking the foundation and the audience and all involved parties, just to get it out of the way. And we think this award, despite having that long list of titles that I carry, is really for the whole staff of Snow Change and our community. So that's never a one man's job, especially a man. Fishing. Well, the thing what's really important to understand regarding Finland is that this is the place where the world's oldest net finding has been discovered. And that was over 10,000 years ago. So we may not do everything really well, but we do fish well. And I was in a fortunate position from very early on to be raised up in the fishery, even part-time commercial harvests with my father. And then in maybe 25 years ago, I started to go to another school, as I often say, which is the on the ice with the really old fishermen, commercial fishermen like Kalevi Vierikka and Olli Klemola and many others. And the reason why I say that is that in these northern parts of the planet, the Arctic and the Boreal, fishing is very much different than what people expect that to be. It's a communion and communication, for the lack of better term, with cosmos. And even in our language, we have survived despite the fact of being a modern society. We say pyytää, which means that we never say we go and take fish. We go and ask the lake or the river to give us that fish. And it's a very different, shall we say, view on nature than one of conquering and destroying.
Great, thank you so much. And now I'd love to delve a little bit deeper into Finland, into your home country, Finland. So I've been there a couple of times, and I was always very impressed with the forest and the nature, and it always felt to me, this is the impression that I had, that the Finns were very protective of the environment, and they had a very good relationship with it, no? And then I, so I always thought that the people from the Nordics, were quite progressive in terms of the relationship with their environment. But then you said that you actually working towards challenging the Finnish norms, and in terms of the relationship with the environment and the environmental preservation. So I would love to hear a bit more about what you mean about that, and how do you actually change mindsets and behaviors, and maybe tell us also a little bit more about how do you evaluate progress so far?
Yeah. I think you are very correct in the sense that the Nordics, Sweden, Norway, and Finland are considered often to be extremely good PR campaign. We did things well, we have social justice, and there are no troubles at all. Well, of course, that would be utopia that doesn't exist. The complexity of the Finnish case, without talking about the other Nordics, is the fact that in the past 75 years, due to our rather specific socio-historical context, we lost 95% of our natural forests to man-made changes below the Arctic Circle. They are the reason why New York Times is being printed over decades on Finnish paper. The pulp mills are churning up our forests into pulp. One of the complexities with that model is that while we have made as a society a big choice in economic terms that has provided for the social systems, free education, and some of the other benefits in our society, it has come now in a price that's very high. Mm-hmm. Not many people know that in world's boreal and Arctic peatlands and forest ecosystems, there's 1/3 of world's remaining soil carbon. And people think of Amazonia and the rainforests as the lungs of the world, but it's actually here where you can find a lot of the untapped, what people discussed also in Glasgow, the untapped and that reserve of a carbon budget that we still have on the planet before catastrophic harm. And now if we put these two drivers together, the image of Nordic forestry and the use of forests, unfortunately, is very different on the ground. Clear cuts, ditching, churning, also of these millions and millions of hectares of peatlands, hydro dams destroyed the last Atlantic salmon rivers, has also had huge social consequences that we are not even discussing. And people's feelings, of course, others have taken economic gain from these points, but there are also great, shall we say, intergenerational trauma in many villages. Now, how do we change that is a question that is a very lonely place. I'm not, of course, the only one. There are many progressive thinkers and critical voices on what happened to our forests. I was starting my talk by saying that we are lake people and forest people. And then, of course, we are kind of in a situation of a self-colonization or a very deep crisis where we know what the natural forest could be, yet we choose to have 95 or over 90% for whole landscapes of economic timber lots. It's really the answer to your final question is that hectare by hectare. So rewilding and restoration and community-led work is a mechanism to try to do better on watersheds. And the last thing maybe to add is that every hectare we are able to work on, it becomes a globally significant site because of the Atlantic flyway and the birds and the carbon and biodiversity hotspots that are here.
Great. Thanks. Yeah, this is indeed quite shocking numbers. And what about you do all your work, from a very specific place, quite far north. So I'd love to hear a bit more about, how do you lead from a very isolated place, right? Turkey is quite far from the rest of, I'll say of the system issue, or the global system, no? So I'd love to hear more about that. So how do you lead from there? What kind of value do you think that also brings, and maybe what kind of impact also you feel that you're having from your Selkie village?
Well, of course, Selkie is connected with roads, so we are not in some kind of a very distant side. But in any case, on a global map, we are on the edge of, it's only 40 kilometers to the Russian border, and so on and so on. How do we lead from here? Probably comes with a view. And I would say that on the margins, if you want to call us on a cultural and geographical margin in the Boreal and further up in the Arctic, we may see things that are blinded on the empire view or on the big society view. And that's why often you will find around the world that in the marginal places, in the edges, that's where a lot of the natural resources harvesting has taken place. And also the people, indigenous and traditional communities, are able to recount a history that would be very sobering. And as we heard on the very first statement today, honesty is a lonely business. Mandalorian would say bounty hunting is a lonely business, but honesty and the fact that these kind of things are also something that we need clarity, and the voices that we could contribute from here are hopefully something that offers a sobering message on what's really going on in the north and in these communities.
Yeah, that brings me to my last question for you, actually, before we complete this conversation. Is a lot of, you highly value the combination of science and traditional knowledge, for rewilding, regeneration and fighting climate change. Why do you think, that traditional knowledge has been overlooked, ignored? I don't know what word to use really, in the equation for fighting climate change or for, environmental protection. Why do you think this has happened?
Well, 80% of world's remaining biodiversity is on indigenous and traditional community lands. And indigenous knowledge was a target of concentrated attack for 200 years by different governments, by churches and others. Now, this late in the game, it's a hard question. How do we learn from that wisdom and position our choices and leadership in a way that would actually matter and shift the kind of things we need to do? And ultimately, it is the women, the elders and the women, where I place my trust, because the men have really, if you want to use categorical view, it's the power of men that has really destroyed our ecosystems. And that's why it has to embrace both new ways of thinking and speed. And the only way to do that is to have a new kind of dialogues with courage and without pride, more humbleness and more listening.
Great. Thank you so much, Kiitos. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Salam.
Salam, salam. I was just waiting for Cecilia to unmute me. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect.
So do we proceed? I think we do.
Yeah, let's see.
Salam again. Wonderful to see you here. The emerging category is new to us. We weren't really sure how it would turn out. You are the proof of how important it is. But I'm intrigued. Repressive governments are the norm rather than the exception today. Here in Bangladesh, there is an environment of fear. While there are protests by students right now, the protests are difficult and dangerous to organize.
Yeah.
floored by the fact that women are in the streets of Kabul at a time like this. And we see people like you. Where does this courage come from?
I think in Pashto we say that if you want to, groom camels, you have to make doors that are higher. So I think we know that the troubles that come, you have to have that big heart to fight it. I guess that's the whole thing.
Well, you received the Malala Fund. She too questioned the Taliban and went on to question marriage, both of which she got into trouble for in various ways. But she has been remarkably silent on the complicity of the West in creating many of these problems. You, on the other hand, have no such inhibitions. You remind us that there is no morality in international politics, that there is only self-interest. You tell the international community to stop creating migrants if they want to stop migration.
Yeah.
You're very clear when you say the world did this to us. What effect do you think this award, provided by a segment of the globe you critique, will have on you?
I think when I was very young, I have always been this headstrong. So I always make sure that people around me do know what I think, even if they don't ask for it. So when I was very young, my mom used to tell me, you need to learn some diplomacy because you cannot just criticize people. You cannot just point fingers. And up until this award, to myself, I used to think sometimes that even if I scream at the whole world, nobody's going to listen or respect it. Because at the end of the day, everyone has an interest in poor people of Afghanistan, in starving children of Afghanistan, in women at home in Afghanistan. All of this serves an interest, be it the Taliban, be it the government of Afghanistan, or be it the Western donors who were very much involved in this crisis. And then I got this award, and it was all because they listened to me. And then I thought to myself, there are like-minded people, and they do listen, and they are not inhibited by what the propaganda is all around the world, that it's black and white. There are always people who are always going to be anti, but there are always going to be organizations like this one, and they're going to respect your work. So I think for me, this helps me. This motivates me to be that I am on the right track.
You're a very pragmatic person and very clear priorities. You talk of policing, you point out the weakness of the logic of the Taliban as well. You talk about women being sexualized. You talk about curricula, about rewriting history. What can you do at a practical level to prevent this happening?
This is one thing I am always concerned about. So when activists talk, that's very different. But when activists work, the whole community stands with them. And I have seen it. It's God's beautiful work. Every time an activist starts working on a grassroots level, everyone knows that they are not coming up with some Western or Eastern or the Taliban's ideology in their mind. They're just making sure that their community survives through it. And for me, that was much more important. For me, pragmatism is, when I talk about girls' education, I do open schools every now and then and make sure that 100 leaders are educated, so that in the next 10 years, when I'm old enough, when I can't talk the loud that I can right now, there are 100 more girls who can talk on the same level and who scream even louder. So for me, pragmatism, but also practicality is important. I make sure that every course has a feminist side to it, so that when girls open books, they see themselves, they see women of color, they see women from their own community, and they look up to them, not just some men from the West who did amazing things.
You just referred to feminism. People tend to think that feminism was something discovered in the West, but over 100 years ago wrote Sultana's Dream, a feminist science fiction novel that took people to a land which was run by women, where the men stayed inside, and that was a dream she had. What would a dream Afghanistan be for you?
For me, a dream would be that girls' education is not politicized the way it is, that women get to go to work. And at the end of the day, men of Afghanistan do realize that Fighting for someone else's agenda within your own country doesn't serve you, doesn't serve your country. That is my dream. I hope the men realize in my country that they are fighting for someone else's war. They're not fighting for their own war or their country.
Well, that leads on to a statement from your video where you say that's not how it works.
Oh, yeah.
For you, you continue to be an optimist despite all of that. How does it work?
At the end of the day, you have to realize that there will always be challenges. I have faced challenges in the past where I was in ministerial meetings and I was asked to leave because I told them that this solution works better. And I still strived, and I still had the community that supported me, and they stood with me, and they opened the schools with me, while the donors who actually went to the same place a million times to launch the same school, we opened actually new schools and kept them running. So that's how it works. You believe in your own community, you believe in your own people, you make sure you give them the right to educate, you make sure that you facilitate it. You don't give it to them, you facilitate it. And you make sure that when you know there are better resources out there, you make sure that those are available to your people because they need it the most. And you are the educated one in them.
I'd like to go to a more personal level. Surely doing what you do in the community that you're in is not easy at many levels, but what are the personal struggles you've had? What are the responses you've had that have surprised you? What have been your disappointments?
I think I always struggle with the governments because somehow I don't fit their agendas at all. For me, it's more on like, you don't need a lot of money to do the work. You just need the right kind of the money. And for them, it's always like, take one picture of a child starving to death and then sell it to the whole world, take the money and then never serve the community for that. So that's one of the huge disappointments that I have faced over the course of years. Every time I talk, people go and target my family, people go target my community, people go target my father or mother. Even yesterday I was targeted for my mom and her roots. That's a disappointment. But at the same time, on community levels, there were times when I met old men and I asked them to send their daughters to school, and he was like, why should I send them to school? What good would they bring? This is a place where we don't have electricity. What can they do? And I was to myself, yeah, why should he send his daughter to school? And this was disappointing because I didn't have answer, and I was disappointed in myself. I went back, I did some research, and I came back to him. I was like, when God sent in Quran, he said that Muslims should pray, right? Men and women. He didn't say that only men should pray. So when God asks you to pray, then why can't you just, when God doesn't discriminate when it comes to praying, why are you discriminating when it comes to education? And he did let girls go to school after that. So for me, that was a big disappointment when I didn't have the answer right away, because I always have answers.
Well, you got there in the end.
Yeah.
But that leads to something else. I mean, you, of course, give importance to, you mentioned very clearly what are the things that students should learn, and that there should be women teachers of a particular level and things like that. But a lot of that seemed to talk about what are considered to be Western modes of learning and education. Is there a different pedagogic model? Is there a different mode of teaching that you think is needed for Afghanistan?
One thing about Afghanistan people tend to forget is Afghanistan used to be the center of arts and culture within the Central Asia. If you see, when it comes to feminism, people always talk about suffragettes movement, but they forget that Gawhar Shad Begum, thousands of years ago, she built the minarets of Herat, and she was actually the first woman who made sure that there are universities, so the whole Central Asia and MENA region can come and study there. And this is thousands of years ago. 100 years ago, we had a women minister of education, while the West didn't even have the voting rights for women. So you have to understand that there is this difference. But also when it comes to education, every Afghan house in Afghanistan has books. It starts with books. We always have books. In the West, I have seen when children start going to schools, the parents buy books for them. I am visiting these families, and when the kids are in school, they're buying stuff. But before that, they have toys. I remember every house that I have been to in Afghanistan, we have a window, and within that window, we have sets and sets of books, and that is practiced. after dinner, the whole house sits together and listens to the radio show, but also practices poetry, also practices the history, also practices the geography of Afghanistan. And that is education in itself. So we start educating ourselves when we are very young, with the olds in our family, with the old tales in our families. And then that continues to the modern world, that I feel like, technology can serve us well, and that we should be focusing on digital literacy. Where we don't have electricity or internet, we definitely have solutions like offline apps, and at the same time, solar panels that solves a lot of problems when it comes to education.
The Prophet's Mosque was very different from the type of mosques we encounter. It was a community center, it was a health center, it was a learning place, it sheltered women. It was even an art space. I know of the Abyssinian artist who performed in the mosque. How do you see the mosque in Afghanistan playing a different role? And would they have a role in education?
I think one thing we need to know about is when the whole world says, oh, these people are fighting for religion. They are not. They're actually oppressing religion, because freedom of religion comes when in Prophet's mosques, the women used to go to that mosque. They used to access the learning, the religion, the praying, the educational opportunities. And in our mosques in Afghanistan, women are not allowed to go. In my mosque, I was never allowed to go. When I started menstruating, I was never allowed to go back. So there is a gender discrimination even when it comes to religion in Afghanistan. The mosques are only built for men whose misogyny or his patriarchy is the only driver of their egos, and that's the only place where it has made them inclusive. So the religion is very inclusive gang in Afghanistan, whereas in the Prophet's era, it was an inclusive communal learning center for the communities.
Well, you are a great example of what we can aspire to. So I look forward to a very different Afghanistan. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Hi, it's Dr.
Hi,
Christian.
Guri.
Hi, can't see you at the moment, but I'm sure you will come on in a few minutes. Good to meet you. This is Gauri Mirpuri from a hotel room in Singapore. Dr. Christian, where are you in the world?
I'm now actually in Boston for just a couple of weeks, but I'm normally based in Rwanda, Kigali.
Of course, yes. Okay, first a quick introduction. Dr. Christian Ntizimira graduated from Harvard Medical School and is today a physician and palliative care activist in Kigali in Rwanda. And it's for his leadership in creating a unique Ubuntu-based approach to death and dying that we are presenting this award today. So Dr. Christian, I want to start right at the start. What were some of the pivotal points in your life that jolted you to change your mind and set you on a different path?
Thank you, Guri. I would like first to join my colleague, the other winners, to thank the Tällberg Foundation and the juries for this opportunity, and especially talking about palliative care and end-of-life care, so which is sometimes considered by most of people the fifth wheel of the courage in the public health system, which is not. And one of the two main points made me to be to change and focus on palliative care. One was the consequence of the genocide against the Tutsi in 1994, when I just realized that I can contribute to be a physician, but not only a general practitioner, but to be a surgeon. Then I went to medical school, and after medical school, I went to district hospital. And when I was working in district hospital, I met a patient, 24 years old, who was really dying with liver cancer. And the saddest story is his mom came to me and kneeled before me and asked if I can give something to him then he can sleep and wake up normal. In that time, I failed twice. One as a physician, because I was feared to prescribe morphine beyond, there is so myth beyond using morphine, opioid. And second, as a Rwandan, because in our culture, when an elder person kneel before a young person, culturally, you are failed. So, and then from that point, I changed from my dream to be a surgeon to a new passion, to be a palliative care physician.
Interesting. So with the genocide, how old were you at the time?
I was 16 years old.
That's going to have a huge impact on you. Talk to us about the myth of morphine. You know, your work has led to a 5-fold increase in its prescription in your country. What is the myth and why did you challenge it?
Yeah, one of the biggest myths surrounding morphine is morphine hasten death. So people fear in most of African countries, people and my colleague physician as well, they fear to prescribe morphine. People think that if you prescribe morphine, the next day or the next couple of minutes, the patient will die. And unfortunately, that increase the suffering of the patient, but not only for the patient, but also for the family members, in the environment also of the patient. And it was really imperative as when I shifted to be a palliative care physician, and I've been trained in palliative care, then I just realized that we need to use morphine more and more for people who have severe pain, of course. And it's release the physical pain, but also it decrease anxiety and depression for the patient and the family members. So we tried through education and advocacy to making sure that people will not, still continue to fear about morphine, but they need to use it. Yeah.
Sure. So you were trained in the West, but you came back to Africa and realized very quickly that the situation, the culture is entirely different. Just talk about that. How has it affected your approach? How did you change?
When I realized that context matters. So you cannot apply something in one side of the world and put it in another side of the world. So education doesn't necessarily mean duplication, but rather than adaptation. And before to adapt, you need to adopt in what is already existed. So then I realized that the matrix of care in palliative care is completely different from West to Rwanda. I can take one of the examples. I realize in Rwandan context, we have a saying: when you are well, you belong to yourself, but when you are sick, you belong to your family. So it's not about the patient's autonomy will remove the community responsibility. It's both. So you will have, it's why we're using a butterfly approach, which is in one wing, you have the patient autonomy about choice, expectation from the patient. And in other end, you have the community responsibility, because the patient is not an isolated component out of his community. The patient is part of the community and the community is part of the society. So it was really, really important to understand that and to work on that platform for something already existed, and now we can adapt to the context or the normal challenges.
So it was interesting. I was listening to one of your interviews, and you said patient is in hospital, and his immediate family or the family that turns up to support him can be anything between 30 people and 50 people. So what, at a practical level, give us an example of how you would approach this in a hospital ward. How would you bring this sort of community that he's surrounded by into the process?
Yeah, one of the, let's say one of the solution, because as the patient is part of the community, you need also to bring the community as a support. So family members are not necessarily barriers or challenges to the support of the patient. And one of the experiences, what we do after admitting the patient is to bring and call, of course, the family members meeting. So as you said, you can expect how many people expect to come to the family meeting in Africa context. It will be around 20, 30 people. And I remember the last meeting I had in Kigali, the last month, it was almost about 40 people came during the meeting. So then you can feel that it will be challenging to convince 40 people on the management of the patients, but this is one side of the perception. But in other side, it said instead of how to use them, how to make a very good communication, how to bring them to understand. One, they need to understand about the disease, they need to understand about the management, and they need to understand about the care. So then I came to realize to set up a concept which was coming from some of existing language and the traditional way of sharing stories in Rwanda, and using animals, archetypes, to describe the suffering of family members. So then from each family members, you have a different language and you have different solutions. And that was really important. And also one of the most important things is to identify who is the lion. In every group, there is always a lion. There is always a leader. And working with that leader to bring the family on the responsibility to support the patient. And the good thing is, in terms of advocacy, it's really good because you talk with the 40 people in the morning and the rest of the village know what about palliative care, which is really good.
Right. Exactly. So last I got the note that we've got time for one last question, and I'll jump to my last question, since death is not a taboo word in your world. But let's talk about your obituary. What 3 sentences do you want written about you when you die?
Okay, good question. It's not common to coffee. So 3 words: resilience, hope, and no regret.
Resilience, hope, and no regrets. Yeah. And are these the 3 things that keep you going as a leader in the work that you're doing on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, as my part of my colleague said, leadership is more about character than a position, and the challenges are an inspiration to bring change in our leadership. So, and I think what makes me wake up in the morning is I have a different leadership. My leadership is not about to have followers, but I'm following, because the leaders are patients. And what I'm doing is just to put a soul in our leadership, and that will make a difference to impact people.
I love that you don't have followers, but that you follow the patient. Thank you so much.
I'm still following the patients because they are the leaders. I'm the follower.
I wish you every good luck in your work, and it was such a pleasure to chat with you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Christian.
Thank both of you for that conversation, and indeed all of you. I think even those brief conversations give you a sense of why the jury selected these 4 people. It also gives you a bit of a sense of the variety of our jurors, which is part of why this process works so well. We, the board of the Tällberg Foundation, started this prize, which was a restart of something we'd done years ago, in 2015. We did that. We decided that emphasizing global was critically important. We've all just lived through, or still living through, a pandemic, which, if it proved nothing else, proves how important global solutions are to global problems. We've asked 3 of our jurors to talk a little bit about their perception of leadership today, and in particular of global leadership. And I'm happy to pass this over to Vishaka Desai. Vishaka, it's yours.
Thank you, Alan. And I'm delighted to be here with my colleagues, Peter and Henry. Peter, Henry, nice to see you again. It's amazing that we have actually not met in person, but I feel like we are old friends. And that's what this jury process does for us. I think we've heard a lot from the winners, and even with Alan's conversation with Andreas, that there's lots of discussion about leadership. We can see it in action from seeing our winners. And I don't know about you, but it makes me feel so good that we were involved in the process that actually chose these amazing people. What I want to do with you is to actually now give people a sense of the process of how we came to select these people without giving away too many secrets, if you will, but we do want to be transparent. So I want to start with a question, and that is that each one of us comes to this process. You two both started this year. I've been with the process for almost the whole time that the prize has been given. What did you come with as an idea for what global leadership would look like? Those two words, leadership and global, really are important in the sense that there could be leadership in one way, but we are talking about global leadership. So tell us a little bit about what you came with and how your ideas changed in the process, if at all, and what are the things that evolved for you? Peter?
Well, thank you so much, Vishaka, for that very nice introduction. And I want to start off by congratulating the winners. This has not been easy, and the competition was extremely stiff. And the fact that you are here today is a testament of the significant work that you are doing, not just only in your communities, but also around the world. Personally, Vishaka, when I first came into this, of course, leadership is always an issue that we think about. And in the context of leadership, you are talking about people, organizing people, organizing communities, and leading them or providing some sort of direction so that something that is a concern or a problem is addressed. And in terms of the global leadership, I was thinking about three issues beyond just our understanding of leadership. The first was the concern or the problem that was being attempted to be addressed, and whether that problem indeed match up to our idea of what is a global problem. The second issue that we were assessing, and especially for me when I came into this process, was to think also not just only about the problem that was being addressed, but what was the impact? And how do we even think about measuring this impact? And this comes from different angles. The third for me was values that were underpinning all the efforts and the attempts that were being made. And as the process evolved, my sense and my understanding, especially of these three things, became even much more interlinked, because problems is the beginning. And then we assess whether people are succeeding based on the impact that they are having in addressing those problems. And the third is really what is making them tick. Why are they doing this? And what sort of values are being exemplified in this process? So over time, as we narrow down from the thousands of nominees to a smaller number and smaller number until we eventually pick the winners, these were the issues that I was looking at, and I became more convinced that this was the angle indeed to look at them.
Terrific. There's something about my video that has not started. Okay, let's see. Is that okay? Right.
You're back.
Yeah, terrific. Sorry, I don't know why that went away. Henry, Peter has outlined sort of how it became interlinked. And I remember many conversations where we had disagreements, but the amazing thing was that at the end, we really came together. And so what was it like for you to evolve your sense of what we were looking for?
Thank you very much, Vishaka, and thanks to the Tällberg Foundation. I also want to congratulate Asha, Tero, Pashtana, and Christian, because it is great to see you. I wish I would be hugging you and congratulating you in life, in person, but this is what the world is giving us for now, and I hope that opportunity will come. For me, Vishaka, and I think Peter laid it out very clear and very, I would say, sort of organic. I was new, and there was a bit of some sort of first doubt, I would say. Am I someone who really, could be a juror and somehow, provide a screening of amazing people, right? Because while I think we've done different things, as I started reading the profiles, it was just overwhelming the amazing things people were doing. And I really enjoyed working with the jurors in our panel conversations, because I think it came quite clear that diversity and different journeys to leadership, and that there was not one definition of leadership. And I think it has already been mentioned before, everyone is a change maker. There is an opportunity for people to bring, in whatever field they are, something that is going to be paradigm shifting, something that is going to be, bringing down barriers. And I think that was a very, I would say, fascinating journey where I think a preconceived, more formal idea of leadership just morphed into something a lot more amorphous and something maybe not
and more dynamic,
more dynamic, more systemic.
Right.
And I was impressed by how humble all of our candidates were when we were able to either read blogs or watch videos. Commitment, I mean, what we have just seen, that is exactly what leadership is now, which is the sort of time of this conversation. But for me, it was indeed a before and after by going through this experience.
Right. I mean, I think what's very interesting, and we've now heard from all four of them, that what comes through is the way we actually came to that decision was that we recognize that global is rooted. That notion of global and local is much more interconnected. That whether you look at Asha or Tero or Christian or every one of them, that they're very aware of their work being context specific, but also connected to the global. And that in itself, it seems to me, is the way we are beginning to define what global leadership looks like. And as Peter, you said, that ultimately we came to kind of the value question, because there are lots of questions and issues in the world that deserve global approach, right? But ultimately we came back to this notion of value-based leadership. And yet, as Andrea and Alan started the conversation with, that why is it in short supply? Especially, we say it seems rare, especially in the political realm, or perhaps in the corporate realm, because it is important to recognize that all four of our winners are neither in the corporate space nor in a completely political space. So talk about your sense of why is it in short supply, especially in the political realm? What are the barriers for people to actually go to that level?
Well, the problem, as you know very well, Vishaka, is that in the political environment and also in the business, there are things that by default end up getting people to think more about short term. If you take, for example, here in the United States, if you're a member of Congress, particularly House of Representatives, you are running in elections every 2 years, and you are thinking about so many things. Will there be someone that will primary you within your party? Will you have enough money to be able to advertise and to make sure that you defend your seat? All of these things drive thinking towards short term. And similarly in business, people are always thinking about how do they maximize profit? How do they make their shareholders happy? How do they capture market share? And sometimes what is required to do that in the short term is thinking in what I would say is often a myopic thinking, where there is really no thinking about the long term and how decisions that are being made now and the action that are being made now will play out in 10 years or in the life of the next generation. Because that is the issue that we always have to think about. And I think that is one of the things that really distinguishes our winners today from many of other nominees that we looked at. It's not really about the position that they have or the amazing titles that they have and all of those things, or being in a global organization or any of these things. This is not really what the leadership is about, but it's really about thinking about how the experiences that we are going through now will shape the world that if we are fortunate enough to live long, we will live in, or if we are not there, will have to affect the next generation. And in all of the cases, whether in the case of Asha, who is concerned about ocean, or Tero, who is concerned about forest, or Chris, who is really thinking about bringing in our African values of empathy and connecting them to the real work that he does in Rwanda, or Pashtana, who's thinking about this huge class of people, women of Afghanistan, and the role that they have played, and the importance in building that vision of a new Afghanistan. You see that there is really a thinking that kind of connect the realities in which they live in to the ideals that they think about for tomorrow. And that is usually not in politics, because politicians are thinking about maintaining power. And it is a real problem, a real concern when power becomes the constant concern, or how to expand earning and make more money and get market share. We have to keep beyond that. Those things are important indeed, because they provide agency for change and for impact. But there has to be much long-term thinking in politics and in business.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Henry, it seems to me that the space that you work in, that what's hard is the collective in relation to the individual issues, right? All of our winners have talked about collective leadership, and that collectiveness is independence in relation to interdependence. Big words, but really hard to actually put in action. And so one of the points that one of the poll questions that was asked is that if you had global and national, which one would you choose in terms of the importance of the issue? Or with the vaccine, are you going to keep it all to yourself before you give it to others? And we're learning again and again, you can do that, but look at what happens every time. You need a national solution, but you also need a global awareness, because there'll be yet another variant that's going to come from somewhere else, whether it's Omicron or whether it's Delta. So talk a little bit about that idea of the challenge of independence versus interdependence in the work that you do as well.
Thank you, Vishaka. And I think the word of agency that Peter mentioned, I think that is very important. I think government has lost that agency that he provided to citizens to see the way they could change their lives. And I think corporates in some areas have also lost some of that. Having said this, I'm an optimist as a good Costa Rican who always tries to find solutions and believes that things are going through changes to become better. And I think the new generation that is really trying to see action soon, that are not looking into, oh, I'll make money and then I'm going to give it back, but rather I would like to do well and do good at the same time right from the start early on, gives me a lot of hope that we're going to be seeing a lot of entrepreneurs, as they call them, people who would like to really bring social change from within established and organizations and institutions, be it governments, multilateral organizations, business. But the other important element, it's a little bit of this interdependence or independence, is that we are going through a big shift in how we organize ourselves. And I think what we have done in this pandemic is just an acceleration of a lot of that. The flux mentality on how we work, on how we engage, on how we talk about our balance between life and work. That is changing a lot of the way we are organizing. And granted that we might be at a privileged position because we have that choice and others might not have that choice. But also I think micro entrepreneurs and people that are in the villages are being pushed to find solutions to their problems. And some of those solutions are not coming from government or are not coming from corporate. And I think that this is now, the interconnectedness that we live makes this sort of barrier between global and national a lot more blurry. And I think now, global problems are felt locally, and local solutions could even being brought to global issues. So I think there is a lot of that, and definitely because of social media and because of the role that technology could play if channeled correctly. I am hopeful that we're going to hopefully make the most of it. And I think, as I was listening to the radio, sort of, came to me that sort of the circle of life, when I went to watch the Lion King, I remember a while back, that song really was rooted into what I felt when I lived it. And I'm like, oh my goodness, here we have from the ocean to rebuilding lives in a foreign country to, looking for how local communities indeed help you improve livelihoods, all the way to having dignity at the end of life. So I felt that was the circle of life, and here we found solutions across all of that, local that is very global, globally important. So I think we have seen those examples.
Right. I mean, so that's why I sometimes think that the very question of would you choose national versus global, local versus global, is actually asking the wrong question. What we have to do is each time, what is possible locally that connects to the global solution? And climate is a perfect example. A young student of mine, exactly to your point, actually talked about that and said that I'm very concerned about the climate crisis, but how do I do something locally that would affect globally? And what we miss is choosing the connections. What we miss is seeing the connections and articulating them. And I do think that our winners actually show that in spades, that is possible. When Tero goes to the climate change panel and does work right in his own local community, he's completely aware, as is Asha, that all of these are interlinked. So how can we do that? And it seems to me, and the last question for both of you, a brief comment, is why do we need the Tällberg leaders? That's kind of a non sequitur, but I will ask you anyway. Why do we need people like this, especially at this point in time? A quick word, Peter.
I could go first, if I may, Peter.
Yeah, please.
One thing I really liked about the Tällberg process is that it's extremely open and quite consultative, in the sense that what I've seen in a lot of the prizes is that it becomes like the same people going through different prizes, So you start early, and then later when you're mid-career is somehow the same people getting the prize, and then when you are a lot more senior, getting the prize. And what I really liked about this is that sort of amazing sort of wide net of nominators, of people who were bringing so many different ideas from so many different walks of lives. I believe people need these platforms. I believe these platforms provide that agency that Peter mentioned, that provides that legitimacy in order for people to really be recognized. But mostly it provides a community. It provides a primary group where people can go and somehow bring, how do you cope with these things? And I think one thing that I think is very important for leadership is that we get rid of that heroic sense of leadership. Well, I think people are doing an amazing thing, and people should definitely deserve that adjective. I think there's nothing heroic here. I think there is indeed a commitment to public service, or a commitment to a bigger mission. I think this is something that the Tällberg Foundation has done a great job in bringing people out. And I have to say that for me, one of the most interesting exchanges was when we were looking at mature leaders and emerging leaders. Sometimes we were having issues of, is this mature, but it's still very young? Is this emerging, but it's still is somewhat old? I mean, age does not matter. A lot of it is on what's your journey and where you are in that journey. So I think it's a great platform, and I hope that the four amazing people that we have celebrated just now will be able to continue building this community and providing a great opportunity for fellowship.
Thank you. And Peter, I'm afraid we don't have time, but I do think that what you said, Henry, that is so important is that it's not just the prize that we give, but the process that has been developed in itself. It exemplifies the notion of collective decision-making, collective leadership. And much kudos to the foundation, especially to Alan, to bring us all together. And big congratulations to the winners. We look forward to having you in the community of the Tällberg family as the years go on. And take it away, Alan.
Thank you very much for that, Vishaka, Henry, and Peter. And the point of that conversation in part was to give everyone a sense of what our conversations are like over those many hours as we sort through endless nominations. In 1968, anti-war protesters in Chicago chanted, "The whole world is watching." Well, COP26, Glasgow, Scotland, last month, the whole world was watching. Today, we have the opportunity for a quick conversation with several people, two of our winners, as well as one of our jury members who were deeply involved, not just in climate, but in COP. And it'll be intermediated by the secretary of the jury this year and last year, Tom Cummings, who is also a board member of the Tällberg Foundation. But this is Tällberg, so let's start with something special by Nadia Washington, which was created for Tällberg's recent and ongoing Jazz for the Planet.
Let the words pull at you, the gravity of the moon. Thoughts trickle out the mouth, truth hits hard, a typhoon. Ancient technology holding memories with ease, shape-shifting, prehistoric existence glistening, accepting everything as it should be. Her voice is like the sound of subtle chimes and whispers. The essence of all humanity, cyclical motion, depths of the ocean. A home of effervescent tranquility. What's really killing me is the blatant disrespect. Broken bottles, shipwrecked, plastic wrapped around my neck. Seems to me we've forgotten all the life she keeps, from conscious to unconscious. Yet we still treat her like a trash heap. The book says it won't be water, but fire next time. Oh, makes us run from the sun glacier past the shoreline. Yet we sit back, make a conscious choice, turn a blind eye. Insurrection, blaming selfish desires, fracking or spreading rumors like cigarette fire. Let's remember the substance that keeps us, cleans us, baptized by 70% completes us, giving life abundantly to every sister, brother. Stop for a moment in silence, appreciate her wonder.
Welcome to our last session. Before I hand it back to Alan, I just want to start by saying what a feast of leadership this has been. And I want to give a warm welcome to all the Tällberg supporters out there, as well as the jurists and prize winners. It's amazing you've stuck with us. And we want to pick up a last final theme that is really around how we consider the way forward out of COP26 in Glasgow. There were many moments for leadership opportunities, I think, opportunities to step up, but maybe it's a false binary to ask whether we are optimistic or pessimistic about COP26, but maybe to hold an eye for possibility that seeing leaders like we have here, that we have the possibility to take different perspectives on what comes out of COP. Thomas Anker Christensen, you're a career diplomat, now the Danish ambassador for climate change on Earth, our home. The goals for COP were clear. What do we focus on now as leaders as we look forward? Where do we put our energy and attention?
Thanks, Tom, and congratulations to all 4 winners. It's such a joy to see you, to hear you, to listen to your take, and I feel also, I mean, you heard the jury discussion just now. I feel so confident in the choice we've made in selecting the 4 of you. and especially because of what Tom is asking about how we go forward, and that whole discussion we've just had about getting the global to local right. I mean, I'm part of the few people who help make global deals and make them hopefully also work. And what few people realize is the depth of the effort it takes to get that collective global political will channeled into a text and agreed, and the kind of coalition and leadership by governments, north and south, but also in local leaders like you, in pushing their governments to make the extra effort, to step forward, to make a commitment that you might not even know how to realize or to pay for or to live up to. But in a way, your leader put his or her name and your country's future on the line, takes that leap of faith into the collective pool of decision making. And the challenge now is then to reward all those leaders who stepped forward, who took that leap of faith, and actually show that the reward lies in getting support, in getting funding, in getting technical assistance, in having investment rolling, partnerships coming online, local communities taking agency, and in a way also owning the decision that was made and those that still need to be made, and supporting going forward. And that is actually as hard as it was to get to the Glasgow decision. It will be even more difficult actually to deliver on it, to deliver more ambition on reduction, to deliver the financing, to deliver the adaptation, new process on loss and damage for the most vulnerable. And I think the global trust that was built in Glasgow, Tom, can also easily be squandered if we do not all live up to our best effort and deliver on it going forward.
Thank you, Thomas. I would like to turn to Asha. You've all met Asha now, and ask a question that's really related to your work. As you are a scientist, now a Tällberg-SNF-Eliasson Global Leadership Laureate, that's a mouthful. You have been working with young researchers over the years, and you've been really seeing that you have to face these young leaders and their future. As you look at Glasgow and you think about standing in front of this group of young potential Earth scientists that we have, what do you say to them? What do you want to express to them?
Yeah, so I mean, I love that, because I think, we are at a tipping point, right? Like, I think we're in this moment, this sweet spot in history where we have more knowledge than we've ever had before on the state of our oceans and what's going on and how we can do better. We have the momentum, we have the tools, and we have the passion, right? And I think that means we are in a unique place. And I think for me, that means I can turn to them with some confidence and say, look, this is our moment. Together we can. And I think that's the only way we can do it. And I want people to realize that we can't give up hope, right? We have to keep hoping, because if you give up hope, you're giving up on everything that's around us, this incredible planet that we live on. And I think COP26 incorporated the oceans for the first time. It's a cross-cutting theme. There's considerations about ocean acidification, not just about warming. These are all really new and important conversations that have come out that give us hope, and there are pledges that have been made. So of course we have to, fingers crossed, those pledges turn into action. That's what we want to see next, right? More than anything else. But I think, we can also see, we've spent a lot of time relying on what happens in those top tiers, right? At the top levels, these governments talking and leaders making commitments. But from where we sit, we have a commitment to the planet, to our oceans. We have a role to play, and we can't just sit back and be like, let them deal with it. We've done that for too long, and this is why we're where we are. But today, at least, it allows me to tell them, we can come together. Let's all push the needle on this. And we can definitely, if we work collectively, if we work as partners, we can drive that change.
So what I hear you saying is that maybe for one of those rare moments in history, we have the possibility to exercise a collective leadership. and to really understand profoundly how to do that. Tero, you have been someone I describe sometimes as having to connect heaven and earth, because you have been serving as both a member of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and as a leader in your village. And as you look at that tension, that set of conditions that are being discussed both in the halls of power as well as among the indigenous peoples that you work with, are we paying too much attention to things like COP26? Are we putting too much hope on this current climate of leaders? Is the hope well placed? Are we putting our eggs in one basket when we maybe should be putting our eggs elsewhere?
Thank you for that. There's a saying here in the village that this works in practice, but does it work in theory? And I think that's partly along the lines of trying to answer that. I think there's a world out there. There's a real, genuine world out there. And that has, there's a gap between this particular reality and the big society that year after year after year discusses and discusses. And the way I would try to position that is that it's a very fragile moment. It's a very, very fragile moment. And Asha was talking about that nexus or kind of a crossroads. And however we choose now, we should be making those choices on the future, not only based on science or only based on technologies or the 4-year election cycle, but it should be building on wisdom traditions, the great spiritual leadership that is around the globe, the Pope, the Islamic leaders, the Hindu leaders, the indigenous leaders, coming together on a kind of a wisdom panel. And the reason why I say that is that we lack leaders in the political realm today on the order of Mandela and some of the other, Willy Brandt from Germany, who instigated the Ostpolitik and brought down the wall in some ways, if you want to look at that. Because the world is simmered up to here with economic interests, the greed. And that's the main trouble. That's why the moment is so fragile. Because as we have heard today from many, many sides, from Africa, from Asia, from Pakistan, from Afghanistan, these are the small villages around the north. These are the places where we could still have maybe a more clear view. The difficulty is that these voices don't get heard. And that's why the moment is fragile, because further down the same old, we will lose this option of even listening and paying attention.
Thomas, is it, does that fit with your thought of what was happening at COP? Were the voices heard or not heard?
Well, I think on the first Sunday morning, General Secretary Guterres came forwards on Twitter. And what he said can be quoted here. He said specifically that indigenous peoples and local communities don't give up despite what happened here. Don't give up on your fight for servicing the planet and humanity with the immense carbon sinks, the remaining biodiversity hotspots, and the traditional wisdom that's still there. Don't give up. He didn't say, we just came out from a fantastic meeting and all of your rights, all of your wisdoms will be ratified. And that's why I think it is. The difficulty in very short form is that rare earth metals will be mined. My house that you see behind me is now claimed by a mining company to produce the new generation of the renewable technologies. What do? Will I fight the company? Well, I will, or have a sturdy conversation. Or how do we find mechanisms to protect those that are now the targets of the what's sometimes known as green colonialism? And these are the complexities of today's world. And there are no easy answers, except to listen, be humble, and do something new.
I want to bring our other two colleagues in. Maybe I'll just go to Asha quickly as you reflect on what Tero is saying, this connection to the deep wisdom. You also live in a world as a practical scientist, developing scientist. How do you see that?
Yeah, so I mean, as I hear Tero speak, I think we're sort of coming from the same place, right? We both understand that there are these larger goals, but the achievement of those goals depend on a lot more than these gatherings at these annual meetings. And I also realize that there's lots of other problems, right? We have overfishing. We allow for overfishing to happen. We allow for the destruction of our oceans. We overutilize, right? Overconsume. And I'm not talking about the sustainable small scale fisheries that can happen. I'm talking about the industrial fisheries, or the ones that happen on the high seas beyond national jurisdiction. So the thing is, while the oceans were part of the conversation, which is awesome, and I want to keep that as a point of hope, what we have to remember is that'll all get derailed if we're not considering all these other problems, because the ocean will, if it is not functioning at its fullest, if it's not able to do all the functions that it does for us, free of charge, carbon sequestration, providing livelihoods, making sure that indigenous communities and local communities have what they need, then if we're not looking after the ocean, making sure that happens, then none of these conversations really matter, right? COP26 doesn't matter if we're not thinking about our global goals and what we're trying to achieve and actually trying to achieve them. So it has to go through, as Alan says, it's not just blah, blah, it has to be something much more than that.
Thank you, Asha. Thomas, as we round up this conversation, the goals were clear, as Tero said: secure global net zero by mid-century, protect the communities and habitats, mobilize the finance, work together to deliver. And as you hear your colleagues, where do you take this in terms of your own hope and your own mission as someone responsible for ambassador for the Earth in Denmark?
Well, not only ambassador for the Earth, but also as someone deeply involved in shaping the outcome, and especially the text on mitigation. I very much sympathize with the Tero and Asha's approaches, and I think, in a way, what you're saying, Tero and Asha, is really part of the whole picture, where local and global leaders like you have an incredibly important role to play in keeping everybody accountable and faithful to the blah blah, to the text and the outcomes. The text and the outcome in Glasgow was, in my mind, stronger than what we could have been expecting, could have hoped for. But its true value only lies in its implementation and in leaders being held accountable to actually delivering on their pledges and promises. And Tero, having been in the office of the UN Secretary General for a while, I can reassure you that in that office and the way they approach policymaking is also by listening to the communities, to the elders, to the wisdom of, well, we don't have Nelson Mandela amongst us anymore, but people similar to him, and actually getting their advice on how you connect to leaders around the world and bring their thought processes into play in order to make that collective global expression of an agreement, but then also to bring it to the local level where, and I fully agree with Asha, it is indeed also about people at local levels around the world taking agency and holding both their leaders and themselves accountable to delivering on what is needed. In the end, Asha, there isn't a planet B, and there isn't a second level of leaders who are doing magical tricks that will solve your situation, the situation of the ocean. It's up to you and your colleagues to do that. There isn't a separate floor of the earth where some magicians are doing the tricks for us. We have to do it ourselves.
Thank you to all three of you. And I want to now hand over to Alan, knowing that the future Mandelas are probably in this room or in our past leader prizes with Tällberg. And thank again the jury and recognize the fantastic work of our prize members. You're already well on your way as I see it. Thanks again. Over to you, Alan.
Thank you, Tom. And thank you, Tomas, both for this and for your work over the course of the last couple of years that haven't culminated at what happened in Copenhagen, but that's just an inflection point on the future work. Before we end the program, let's hope Pashtana is able to come back with us. what I would like to do is to congratulate Asha, Tero, Christian, Pashtana. There you are, Pashtana. On behalf of the Tällberg Foundation Board, but also of the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, of Andreas Dracopoulos, and of Jan Eliasson, congratulate you not just for your willingness to accept our award, but for all the work you're doing. If anyone dropped in from Mars and listened to this last hour and a half conversation, they would think the planet's in a much better place than at least I think it is. But that's partly because of what you guys are doing. So thank you very much for all of that. And let me add on behalf of the foundation, and with apologies to Humphrey Bogart, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. We will stay friends and work together as the years pass. Please stay with. What I'm going to do now is, at the end of these things, there's a long list of people you have to thank for making them possible. I want to start by thanking the audience who's been with us for this last hour and a half, as well as all of those, and in a digital world, many more people will actually see this online over the next weeks and months. So thank you for joining us to think and talk about leadership. In particular, none of this happens without Cecilia Nordstrom and Sarah Ersson, who are sitting somewhere in a studio in Stockholm. Thank you, guys. But also Sophia Franson, Reed Andres, Martin Coates, who engineered that video of the winners, which was absolutely terrific. Again, I want to thank in particular at all of the people who nominated leaders this year. As I said, there were more than 2,400 nominations. That required people to sit and think and talk about leadership and ultimately put, if not pen to paper, at least finger to computer, to nominate. That process of thinking about leaders starts again in February. We will kick the ball for the 2022 process at the start of next year. We urge you all to nominate again. Meanwhile, I'd like to urge you also to listen to New Thinking for New World, our Tällberg podcast. Many of the people you've heard today have participated, many others. You can listen to it on our website or on your favorite platform. And finally, the holidays, which are approaching, are a time for giving. If you think the work of the Tällberg Foundation is valuable, we would appreciate your support. It doesn't matter if it's 10 euros or a million yen, it would be extremely helpful. So final word, I want to thank again all of you, congratulate the winners, thank the jury, thank my colleagues, and next year will be even a better year. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.